The European Union says it will not recognize the results of the polls by pro-Russian activists in eastern Ukraine. A spokeswoman for the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Catherine Ashton, called the referendums in parts of Luhansk and Donetsk regions illegal, saying their outcome will not be recognized. Meanwhile, the French president has also denounced the vote as null and void. François Hollande called for another round of sanctions if the May 25th presidential election doesn't take place. The EU stance came after pro-Moscow activists claimed a massive turnout in a vote to turn East Ukraine into two independent republics. The vote was also denounced as a farce by the pro-Western government in Kiev. Meanwhile, the EU foreign ministers have gathered in Brussels to settle their differences over how to de-escalate the crisis in Ukraine. Well, joining us now is William Jones. He's with the Executive Intelligence Review, and he joins us via Skype from Leesburg. Mr. Jones, thank you very much for joining us here on Press TV. Now, the central government, interim government in Kiev calls this referendum a farce, yet the people of eastern Ukraine have spoken. How do you see this referendum moving on here forth?
Well, obviously, it's going to be a very unsettled time going ahead. Everybody seems to condemn it, although everything points to the fact that these people wanted to make their mark at this point to indicate where they wanted to go prior to the May 25th elections. And that created a situation that can't be ignored. It can't be denied, although the denials are coming up, and the blame game is being played, trying to blame Vladimir Putin and the Russians for something they probably had no influence over whatsoever. Of course, they had wanted it to be at least postponed, but the people on the ground wanted to have it, and I think they wanted to have it before May 25th, and therefore there's going to be a continued development of instability in the region. It depends largely on the reaction of the Kiev government and of the West as how this is going to turn out.
Okay, so do you think that with the presidential election also looming in Ukraine, how do you see the people in eastern Ukraine now reacting to that? It's quite certain that they do not recognize the interim government in Ukraine, and they do not see any legitimacy in this presidential election.
Well, I think you're probably going to see a boycott of the election by the people in eastern Ukraine. And so you've got a situation there with the people there have taken a stand, which was characterized by the vote today, and the rest of the country is out on May 25th. If there is no substantial turnout in the eastern and southern sections of Ukraine, then it's hard to call that a legitimate election for the entire country. And so we're still at this situation of a standoff, which is going to require some kind of diplomatic resolution, some kind of internal resolution between the parties as to how Ukraine is going to be governed in the future.
And how do you see Russia now responding? Obviously, the people in eastern Ukraine who have voted in this referendum earlier today are going to look to Russia for support. We did hear President Vladimir Putin try to persuade these leaders to call off the referendum, saying that the situation wasn't conducive for one at the moment. But now that it has taken place, do you think Russia is going to basically champion their cause, or are they on their own from now on?
Well, I don't think they're completely on their own, because Russia has an interest in the results here, but it also, there are ties between the Russians and the Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine that can't be ignored. But I don't think there's going to be any dramatic action on the part of the Russian government. I think, judging from the statements of President Putin over the last few days, that they will try and find some kind of peaceful, diplomatic, negotiated solution to the situation in Ukraine, rather than anything that would be of a more dramatic or even a military nature. But they're going to be very watchful. They're going to take a close look at the situation. And again, I say it's largely on the reaction of the West to the events today, and as we go into the May 25th election, their reaction to that, which will determine whether or not we're going to have some kind of a a peaceful resolution, or maybe we'll go toward a less than peaceful resolution, judging from the violence that's also ongoing today in certain parts of Ukraine.
And before I let you go, Mr. Jones, also the West is calling for, many leaders in the West at least, are calling for more sanctions against Russia for what's taken place earlier today as far as the referendum goes. Do you think we're going to see more sanctions, or are we going to see a more buildup of NATO forces in areas closer to the Russian border?
We may see both. If that occurs, however, what is now a conflict of forces within Ukraine then is placed on a much higher level in a conflict between the United States and Russia. It's always been latent, of course, since the beginning of this crisis, that the Russia-U.S. relationship has been key in all of this. But if it is ratcheted up to a further level and blaming Russia for what has happened today in Ukraine, I think we're moving more and more to a greater unstable situation internationally and the danger of conflict between nuclear powers.
Okay. That was William Jones with the Executive Intelligence Review joining us from Leesburg via Skype. Mr. Jones, thank you very much for your comments here on Press TV.